When I try to explain it, I have to wonder if I am being stalked or just going crazy. I have never had a hallucination before, but my experience has me now believing in things I used to scoff at. This all started last October during my drive through northern Connecticut. I was returning home from visiting my brother, who had been dealing with some relationship troubles. My visit had dragged on longer than I intended, and by the time I was on the road, it was almost midnight. I had a 7-hour drive that would take me meandering through the scenic countryside. I had been traversing past old towns for about an hour when a deep fog rolled in. This was not unusual for this time of year, so I didn't initially think much of it. I slowed my car down to a safer speed, about 30 miles per hour. The thickness of the fog was demanding on my eyesight, forcing me to lean forward in my seat as I attempted to peer through the obscured ambiance. At last, I began to see more than just the dispersed water. But my heart dropped. Through the canopy of mist, I saw the tree trunks. They were gnarled and twisted in an inexplicable manner. I tried to render a scene of nature, but phoned it in halfway through. I shook my head violently, attempting to convince myself that I must be getting tired. But the trees became no less surreal. The changing of the sky arrested my bewilderment and forcefully exchanged it with shock. Below the shimmering black rays of sunlight, which began to part the fog beneath them, a being floated. It was majestic and uncanny, humanoid in appearance, yet monstrous in its aura. Its proportions were off in a way that tingled the parts of the brain responsible for both disgust and admiration. I pulled over as my car engine began to sputter and go silent. My heart was pounding as I got out. I don't know entirely why I did. Part of me was stricken with fear over seeing more of that being. But that same part of me had more fear of not seeing it fully. The entire forest grew silent. The fog was now almost entirely gone, the only evidence of its evanescent presence being the humidity that clung to my car's window. I looked up in the sky where the being should have been. What I saw buckled me to my knees. It was a giant circular shape. The formation of the shape was slightly bent, giving it an eye-like appearance. Inside the ring of floating steel was an eye of vapor. I then understood what happened to the mist and the sound. A vacuum was gently pulling the noise toward it and beckoning my soul to behold it. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" under my breath, but the words fluttered noiselessly from my lips as they were fished through the air. But this floating structure, immediately after the noise started. This was not a return of the noise that I should have been hearing, but a new noise being born from this magnificent machine. A deep, reverberant hum that rippled through the ground, It traversed through my shoes and my spine violently. It was so low that I felt it more than I heard it. The trees reacted to its utterance, their leaves shaking off their branches from the unrelenting vibration. The eye in the sky began to rotate slowly, accelerating in speed. Suddenly, beams of light brimmed from it, cascading beyond me, until they returned and bent around the structure supernaturally. This symphony of luminance blinded my vision. When my eyesight returned, I saw the beams shifting in their patterns, creating living shapes, like long-forgotten symbols of antiquity crawling about the air. I stumbled backward and tripped on the berm of the road as my heart began pounding thunderously. I scrambled to get back into my car as I became more coherent of the danger I was in. I started slamming my car as I attempted to start it. Had the vacuum not been pilfering the sound, I think I would have gone deaf from my car horn with how hard I was slamming it. Finally, the car started. But I was not in control. The colors of the light on my dashboard began to warble and form similar shapes to those in the air. I began shaking in fear and frustration as I felt my entire world was glitching. I then heard a whisper that both soothed and terrified me. It wasn't in my ears. It was inside my skull, like someone had spoken directly into my soul. A single, fragmented word. Found. The slamming on my steering wheel ceased as I was gripped by fear. The hum around me turned into a rhythmic thudding, like a creature was taking enormous footsteps somewhere deep within the earth. The eye above me constricted, and all the beams of light receded into it in a sharp snap. In a brazen flash, the being returned. It slithered out of the eye in a chaotic yet majestic cadence. It began to lower itself to the ground, as if it was dangling from invisible threads. It was tall, far too tall to be of this earth. Its arms were the length of its standing body. Its fingers were gnarled in their shape, but smooth in their glossy complexion. What fascinated me most was the face it lacked. Where this body feature should have been was displayed only a featureless oval that reflected white light like wet clay. I could feel all the organs in my body began to pulse in rhythm with the thudding as I realized it was beckoning to me. With all my might, I shook off the pull of its allure and slammed my foot down on the gas. To my amazement, my car began accelerating. Frantically, I made the most ugly U-turn of my life as I began careening down the road in the opposite direction I had arrived. My car's radio turned on and began blaring in angry refusal as I created distance between myself and the entity. Only there was no melody of music from the radio. It was a cacophony of sounds, too irreverent of earthly origin to describe, or from the growing madness of my own mind. The trees of the forest began to assist the protest of my escape as the bent inward toward the road as I passed them. Some snapped viscously as they proceeded to ooze out a black dark fluid. A fluid that matched the luxurious sheen of that being. The pedal beneath my foot must have been carving into the floor of my car. However, to my relief, I could see the hellish scene behind me grow smaller in my rear-view mirror. The sound around me didn't properly return for another 15 miles. I could no longer see the being, the eye, or any misshapen trees, but I was being followed. I could feel it. The radio had long since returned to normal, broadcasting the rock station I generally listened to. Despite this return to normal, I was shaking. I wanted to see it again. For days afterward, I tried to persuade myself that nothing had happened, that it was all either from sleep deprivation or being spooked by the dark. Any rationalization sounded better than admitting it could have been something vast, intelligent, and looking for me. I had almost fooled myself into this facade of security. But a week later, that faith was shaken. As I was walking my dog, something I do most nights before going to bed, I was wrestling with a sense of melancholy I couldn't quite put into words. My reflection was shuttered when I noticed white clouds swirling above my house in a circular pattern. They created a shape eerily similar to the eye. Then it blinked. I was buckled to my knees again as I heard aloud, "Found you," from deep inside my soul. I don't think it was an eye in the sky. It was something looking through it. It was that being. It knows where I live. I don't know if I will run. The forest has always scared me. Despite living next to it my entire life, it never grew on me. When my brother dragged me into the woods to play, I always drug my feet. My eyes always played tricks on me, making me see figures peeking out from the trees. I stared at them now with narrowed eyes. In the daylight, they looked like trees, nothing malignant about them. My little brother looks at me like I'm crazy. My mother has started to turn a deaf ear to my worries. She tells me a 16-year-old shouldn't be worrying about things like that. Dad never even pretended to listen. He only rolled his eyes and then checked out of the conversation. Just Vanessa being Vanessa, they said. Sighing, my mom walked behind me, her disappointed face reflected in the glass. I shook my head. The trees stood still, staring back at me. Ever since that college kid had killed himself in the woods, I had been on edge. Muttering, my mom threw her hands up in the air and walked off. He said. I turned then. Shut up, twerp. Wait until some girl stomps us all over your heart. Jason just stuck his tongue and ran. Mom dipped her head around the corner and shot me a glare. I snap. It comes off a little meaner than it needs to. I rolled my eyes, as if she would. I turned back to the window. I felt like I was being watched. Part of me thought I might catch someone or something peeking from around one of the trees. Dinner is good, but I find myself looking through the window. Dad points at me with his fork, Legati impaled on the tines. He asks. I ignore his jab. The feeling of being watched is back. I don't understand how the others don't feel it. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Mom nods as she takes a sip of her iced tea. That was untrue, but I wasn't going to argue the point. Dad let out as he set down his fork. Vanessa, honey, this is getting ridiculous, don't you think? He taps a hand on the table. The words are on his mouth, and I brace myself for them. I'm gonna need you to stop being so scared of the woods, honey. I grit my teeth. Then Jason would open his big fat mouth again and tell his friend. He would tell his sister, who would tell her boyfriend and her friends, and so on. The telephone cord extending from person to person. I would be a pariah again. My friendships were fragile enough as it was. This would sink them. I was sure of it. I say it quietly, staring down at my plate. The feeling doesn't leave. It lingers as I wash the dishes. The sun sets, and the gloom only deepens, the shadows stretching longer and longer onto our lawn. Only once I'm locked in my room does the feeling leave. I leave my curtains closed just in case. The knocking jolts me awake. It's a steady sound, a light thunk, thunk against a window. My eyes slowly look to my window. Whoever it is isn't outside my window. Somewhere down the hall, a person mutters. A door creaks open, and heavy footsteps start to pad down the hall. The knocking moves. My dad mutters. His tone is annoyed. There is another voice. This one is distinctly feminine. What was my mom doing? Taking off my blankets, I march out of my room, despite my brain telling me not to. The cold floor sends a shudder through my body. None of the lights are on in the house. Moonlight gleams in through the windows. Dad is walking into the living room towards a glass screen door that hasn't been opened since the snow fell. He mumbles under his breath. I flick on a light before he grabs the handle. He freezes, and his head snaps up. He looks at me with sleepy eyes. Dad looks back at the door, confused. My dad has never slept walk in his life. The base of my neck prickles, and I look out the kitchen window. There's something behind one of the trees. I blink, and it's gone. Only the vague impression of some figure is left in my mind. the feeling of being watched disappears with it as Mom leads my dad back to bed. The next day, I stand in the backyard. My fingers are still cold in my gloves. The pom-pom on my toque rustles in the wind, not helping with the seriousness of what I'm about to do. The snow lays still on the lawn, undisturbed. The crunching makes my teeth hurt as I slowly walk across it, up to the trees that border our lawn. Dad never bothered building a fence. Wandering animals didn't bug him, apparently. The thought of some intruder striding out of the trees and into the house was also apparently too ridiculous for him to consider. The trees look less menacing in the daylight. White poplars with black spots covering them like a Dalmatian. Snow and ice clings to their branches. Sunlight shines down between them, revealing nothing more than deadfall and more trees. Feeling slightly more emboldened, I step past a tree, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. I'm not sure what I'm expecting to find, but I feel a little more at ease. My parents were right. I was just seeing things. Dad sleepwalking was just an odd coincidence. It's as I turn back that I see it. Right behind one of the trees are 2 footprints. They aren't contained to a pair of boots. I can see the toe imprints. Sprinting out of the trees, I ran back into the house, locking the door behind me. My parents glance at me as I barge in, breathing heavily. I can't even form words as my mom rushes to my side. The old habit kicks in. Slowly, I take some deep breaths. The tightening feeling around my chest dissipates. I manage. Dad mutters under his breath. I scream. My body trembles as I plead with my father. Sighing, he gets up from his chair and grumbles over. We walk out to the spot in silence, but I stop short, only pointing at the tree. He grumbles and looks behind it. He motions me over. I walk forward in a daze. He must have the wrong tree. There was no way to miss them. He looks at me concerned now. Judging from it, I can tell that I'm about to see my therapist very soon. He leads me back, gently whispering in my ear. The rest of the day passed in a daze as my mind raced. The image of the footprints burned into my mind. I hadn't imagined them. Conversation is quiet and awkward. None of my parents' attempts get me to talk. Whatever is out there is going to get my family. I'm sure of it. Last night, I heard my mom's voice. Does that mean it can mimic to lure them out or welcome itself in? It wants my family, and I don't know why. I lay awake in my bed, the fatigue making my eyes droopy. I can't afford to fall asleep. I'm convinced whatever is out there is going to lure us one by one out of the house. It's around midnight when I'm proven right. This time, it's both of them. I don't wait this time. Flinging open my door, I watch as they march side by side, eyes closed. Running into the kitchen, I turn on the lights. This does nothing. They keep moving like nothing happened. I scream. Still nothing. Wake up, you two! My wild screams do nothing to deter them as they split from one another, walking around the kitchen table, only to march side by side again as they approach the glass door. The forest is dark and gloomy, the light beating back the dark. The eyes are the first thing I notice. The figure is tall. She's at least 7 feet tall. Her hair is snow white, the skin matching. Pale blue veins can be seen under it. She wears a long, dark robe, but even from where I stand, I can see her feet are bare. A long hand with sharp nails scratches the bark of a tree. The other beckons with a single finger. I scream a loud, shrill cry that fills the room. My brother cries in the background, and then hands are grabbing me as the figure slinks into the darkness. My mother looks at me with wild eyes. Dad grabs my little brother from around the shoulders, ushering him back down to his room. His glances over his shoulder once, eyes full of concern. She hisses. I look up at her, confused. What is she talking about? She wraps her arms around me. I don't even know what to say to her. Halloway, honey. We'll get this sorted. The statement is insane. She leads me back to my room and tucks me in like I'm an 8-year-old. Pulling up the blankets to my chin, she curls next to me. And sleep eventually takes me. As the hours pass by on Sunday, a dread creeps into my body. She'll be back tonight, and this time my little brother will join my parents. I look at Jason as he eats a bowl of frosted flakes. He looks down at his bowl, stirring the soggy flakes around. I have no idea how to prepare. The tall woman is something beyond this world. The only thing I understand is that she can't come into the house. All I can do is try to wake them up tonight. There was no way I would be able to sneak out of the house. My parents watch me warily from the living room, the TV quieter than it has ever been. I sat in silence for the entire day, sleeping at certain points. When night fell, I noticed it took my parents longer to fall asleep. When it was 11, they finally shut off the TV before going back to bed. I laid awake in my bed for another excruciating hour. When I could finally hear their breaths, I snuck out of my room. Every move I made was slow and careful. The first thing I did was look at the glass sliding door. My heart leapt into my throat. She was already there. A wide grin split her face, teeth as white as her hair. Slowly, she raised her hand and started beckoning. Something deep down told me I didn't have much time. Yanking open a drawer, I grabbed a box full of tacks. I'd worry about them yelling at me later. All I needed them to do was wake up. Lining them up against the screen door, I kept an eye on the woman, determined not to let her unnerve me. Grabbing a length of rope I had with me, I tied it to the end of the hallway. The woman stood still. Only her long finger moved, beckoning. The windows and doors were next. I tacked the front door and bolted it shut. The house was still silent. Whatever spell the woman was working on, my family would be in effect soon. Why it didn't work on me, I didn't know why. I didn't have the time to think about it. I only had a few tacks left, and I tried to divide them in front of my parents' and brother's doors. They all started to shuffle suddenly. Running back to the kitchen, I flung all the lights on, and then dug some pots and pans out of the cupboards. It was stupid, something straight out of Home Alone, but I didn't know what else to do. I glared out the window at the grinning woman as the doors to my parents' and brother's room opened at the same time. The first set of tacks did nothing. I immediately started banging the pots and pans together. I screamed and yelled, and they still advanced, eyes closed shut. My dad trips right over the rope and lands on his nose. A sickening crunch follows it. My mother trips over him, but scrambles back up. Slamming my pots and pans together does nothing. Jason steps over my dad and turns for the front door. My father slowly rises to his feet and marches towards the glass door. I'm stuck between the two groups. I move a foot in the direction of my brother, before my mom pushes right by me. I grab onto her arm, trying to drag her down, and I'm thrown to the ground for my efforts. I hear the door unlock, such a soft, simple sound. Then it creaks open, and I watch my brother disappear around the corner of the house. A horrible laugh comes from the woman. It mocks me as I cling to my mother's angle, shrieking. She steps onto the tacks, and for a brief second, she jolts before ripping open the glass door. Cold air rushes in, and I lose her just as quickly. Nothing I did even remotely worked. My father shoves by me. I try with all my might to stop him. Swinging my frying pan, I crack it off his skull. It makes a horrible thud, and I can see the blood trickling down his forehead. He stops for a second. Then he rears back his fist. I never felt the punch, but I do feel the throb in my head as I pick myself off the floor. The sun has risen, and cold air rushes in. I'm numb, shaking and shuddering on the floor. Footprints march across the snow and into the woods. Putting my head in between my legs, I weep. There's a folklore in my school that has existed for generations, but it was real. I only felt regret again and again. It is useless to try and flatten my shattered mind after seeing that tree. I know I will not be in this world much longer, but this must be known. I hope no one else makes the same mistake. There were rumors they were associated with taboo rituals and human sacrifices. My first year was fine until Miko walked in one day with an envelope sealed in dried blood. He walked toward my bed, his eyes full of horror. "This one is for you," he said in a strangely soft voice. "It's strange. I found this at the bus stop today. I thought it was something lost by a schoolmate until I saw your name on it," he continued. The words were written in something scarlet. "It looks like blood." I didn't open it. "Perhaps you have trouble with the mob, or some weirdos." He left the room at a fast speed, as if escaping something in horror. I touched the seal. It was sticky and smelled of iron. I opened the envelope, and my heart stopped. Duke was my best friend who had died of cancer when we were 10. I began to read the letter, and a wave of horror washed over me. I still remember everything from when I was alive. Time is just nonsense to me now. I am not what mortals call death. I, and others, are at a state beyond your understanding. You will know what I mean soon, Will, my best but only friend. That night, when you took me home, I was weak and unconscious. My parents left me alone, knowing every effort was useless against the rules of nature. When I was walking on that dark road, the starless sky above me, trees stretched their hands. Suddenly, a knocking on my door and heavy footsteps awoke me from my immersion. Miko reappeared, his face panicked and sweaty. "Will, I think we got something really bad. Something horrible on this island," Miko panted. "The old folklore has been proved today, just like 500 years ago. We shall not ignore those tales. They are not nonsense. There's something beyond our understanding happening right here." I gave him a glass of water. When he finally stopped gasping, he spoke again. "Do you know that on this island there's a cave deep underground? Every 500 years, demons, the unspoken things, come out and cause an earthquake." He took out a yellowish book. I stole it from the school's archive. I opened the old book. It was a diary from the founder of St. John's College. It explained how the missionaries founded the school here, and the first group of students were the kids of the local islanders. They seemed to enjoy the school at first, and for a while, everything was peaceful. However, one day, the elders suddenly found the missionaries in a state of absolute panic. The elders warned, every 500 years, when the island begins moving, the demons will rise from the abyss and everyone will die. The missionaries ignored the warnings as superstition. However, later that night, a missionary named John dreamed of his dead mother standing beside his bed. Suddenly, the ground shook so hard he was thrown from his bed. He woke to see his brother standing there, calling him in his mother's voice. Behind his brother's head, a blood-colored flower was blooming, its roots growing deep into the skull. Every islander he saw had the same flower blooming from their head. When we finished reading, the land began to shake. Every muscle in our bodies shivered. We held each other's hands and walked quietly out of the empty dormitory. Under the dark, starless sky, the same day Duke had described, we walked onto that dark road. Then we heard it, the sound of an engine. But this time, it was not behind us. It was right in front of us, at the campus. Dad returned with a sad face again. He hadn't got the job, of course. He used to work at a grocery store whose owner was ruthless, and his nonsensical, infuriating provocations had become unbearable. Dad endured it for 6 months. No one else would have. The constant humiliation, the endless tolerance, all of it weighed on him, yet he never complained, never let it show at home. He carried the burden quietly, as though suffering were something expected of him, something he had already accepted. Dad was my hero, actually, more than that. He wasn't just encouraging, he was enthusiastic and charismatic. Our bond was more than a typical father-son relationship. It was deep. He could read my face effortlessly, as if he were receiving printed copies of my thoughts in real time. Such was our connection that I could sense his presence even in a crowd of hundreds, as though some invisible thread always tied us together, pulling gently whenever either of us strayed too far. His relentless job search continued. He signed up on every online job portal he could find, filling out applications late into the night, his eyes tired, but hopeful. Rejection emails piled up, but he never let them slow him down. Every morning, he woke with the same resolve, convinced that persistence itself would eventually be rewarded. He was religious, often going to church. The bishop there loved his presence and called him a noble soul, one destined to suffer. Dad was especially concerned about my stammering problem. He believed there had to be a cure, some way to lift the weight that speech placed on me. For that reason, he prayed relentlessly, hoping for a miracle that would make my life easier than his had been. A few days later, Dad came running toward me, his face glowing, breath uneven, eyes wide with excitement. Exactly, he'd gotten the job. It was an email from one of the job portals he'd applied to. The email stated that his application for the position of helper at a research facility had been accepted. The research team consisted of 4 scientists working on an undisclosed project, and duty hours could be extended due to the lack of additional helper staff. Relocation might be required, but allowances were already included in the salary. As soon as I finished reading, Dad beamed, smiling like a child who had just won a prize he never thought he'd afford. "See? They need a helper. The pay's more than good enough to resist, Simon," he said, unable to hide his joy. "Yeah, great. But you'll leave me here alone," I replied. "You can't travel daily." He sighed softly and rested a hand on my shoulder. "This job means a lot to me, son. Especially the money. We have expenses. You're 16. You don't understand yet. I'm doing this to secure your future. I'll visit every week." The next day, Dad left for work, and the house felt quieter than it ever had. In the meantime, I began practicing speech tutorials, videos meant for people who stammered. I wanted to surprise him when he came back, to show him that his prayers hadn't gone unanswered, even if the miracle arrived slowly and imperfectly. 2 weeks passed. Dad didn't visit once, though we spoke often on the phone. His voice always tired, always distracted, as if something constantly pulled his attention away. He sounded drunk, his voice shallow, but strangely enthusiastic. "Simon, I'll visit you soon," he said. "But listen carefully. I'm sending you a package." Confused, I interrupted him, asking who Aaron was, but he spoke quickly, urgently, telling me not to let it fall into anyone else's hands, not to go outside, not to visit my friends, and to stay home until it arrived the next day. He told me he loved me, and hung up before I could say anything else. The next morning, I woke with a strange feeling, anxiety without reason. My body felt fine, but my thoughts were chaotic, almost paranoid. While I was lost in them, the doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession. When I opened the door, I saw only a small package, no larger than a 2x2 box. Dad's package. The delivery man was gone. I thought I saw someone sprint past the trees nearby, but the leaves obscured most of my view. It looked like an ordinary Amazon parcel. I went inside, grabbed a knife, and opened it. Inside was nothing, just a small bag containing some kind of shimmering powder. "Huh," I muttered. I immediately called Dad and told him everything. His voice turned urgent. "Simon, that shimmering powder is Aaron," he said. "They're nanoparticles. Mr. Arthur will explain everything." The air smelled metallic, and my thoughts felt pulled, as if something unseen were tugging at them. I heard faint chirping sounds, metal scraping against metal, before another voice interrupted. "Hello, young lad," the man said calmly. "This is Arthur, senior scientist. Your father is a hard-working man. Don't let him down." In the background, I could hear Dad yelling that he'd visit in 2 days. My heart skipped a beat. I asked what kind of sick joke this was, but then I realized something terrifying. I hadn't stammered once, not a single pause, not a broken word. I spoke fluently, perfectly. Joy surged through me, overwhelming the fear. But the call ended abruptly, and the unease remained. The stammering was gone, but something within me wasn't satisfied. It felt like I had swallowed something stale. My body temperature rose, my thoughts wandered, and I felt as though I wasn't fully in control anymore. Then Aaron spoke within me, using my own voice, but carrying a distinct identity. I felt chained somewhere deep inside my mind, aware of myself, yet unable to act, as Aaron took over completely, leaving me suspended in a dreamlike state. Hours later, I regained control. To test it, I spoke again, and the stammer returned. That meant I was myself again, though I could still hear a faint hum within me, like someone breathing just beneath my thoughts. The cycle repeated. Aaron dominated for hours while I slept, and when I woke, my breath smelled pungent, and my nails appeared slightly reddish. Details I couldn't explain. While hurriedly taking the stairs one evening, I slipped and fell several steps, hitting my head hard enough to knock myself unconscious. As darkness closed in, I felt the familiar chaining sensation return, even as my limbs moved on their own. When I woke later, I couldn't remember what had happened in between. The next day, the doorbell rang again. I realized I was myself and peeked through the door to see Dad standing there. Before opening it, I ran to my room and scribbled a note. "We'll only talk in sign language for some time. No speaking." I hugged him when I opened the door and handed him the paper. He smiled, happy that I could speak fluently again, unaware that I couldn't, not as myself. As dusk approached, my thoughts spiraled, and I locked myself in my room, determined not to open the door until I was in control again. The following morning, I woke with a metallic taste in my mouth. My breath smelled pungent, my shirt was stained with blood, and my hands trembled as I stared at them. The bedroom window was broken. Whatever Aaron had done, he had gone outside. I was more afraid for Dad than for myself. That evening, Arthur arrived. He didn't ask permission to enter. He told me plainly that my father had been sent for this purpose alone, and that he wanted to gift me the cure. Aaron required familiar organic matter during early integration. My father had consented, believing it would save me. Arthur spoke without apology, as though explaining a mechanical fault. When he finished, I felt the hum deepen, steadier than before. I didn't argue. I turned toward the wall and drove my head into it as hard as I could. When I woke, Arthur was gone. The house was quiet. Now I live with Aaron. When he dominates, I am aware but helpless, unable to act or interfere. When I return, things are orderly, efficient. There is no stammering anymore. No questions. No father. In all the time I have lived with Aaron, I have learned one thing it won't ever admit. Aaron is afraid of consciousness. It can imitate thought, predict behavior, optimize responses, but it cannot not understand awareness. It doesn't understand being. Whenever I was fully awake, it hesitated. The hum softened, its certainty fractured. Consciousness isn't something it can overwrite cleanly. That's why it prefers me unconscious, why it thrives in sleep, in injury, and absence. Awareness frightens it, not because it threatens Aaron's control, but because it exists outside its logic. I understood then that as long as I remain conscious, Aaron would never be complete. I grew up in Medway, in one of those villages that still pretends it isn't part of anywhere important. You know the kind. A Norman church with a leaning tower, a pub named after an animal that doesn't live here anymore, and a strip of ancient woodland everyone insists is just trees, despite being older than the road, the houses, and probably the idea of Christmas itself. There's a footpath that cuts through the wood. Public right of way. Shows up on ordnance survey maps in that confident pink line that suggests nothing has ever gone wrong there. People use it all year, except between the solstice and New Year. No signs say this. No council notice. You just learn. Like you learn not to whistle in certain fields or take hawthorn indoors. In school, they told us it was because the path floods. It doesn't. On Christmas Eve this year, I took the path anyway. My mum was in Medway Maritime. Buses were off. Taxis wouldn't come down the lanes because of ice. My phone was on 8%, and the long way round would have taken an hour. I told myself I was being stupid. I'm in my 30s. I don't believe in bells in the woods. The path swallowed me almost immediately. Kent woodland in winter feels close. Chalk underfoot, roots slick with frost, hornbeam and oak knitting together overhead. Holly flared dark and glossy in the half-light. Everything felt old, older than the villages, older than the church. That's when I saw the lanterns. Not electric, not solar. Real flame lanterns hanging from hawthorn branches every few meters, as if someone had carefully laid out a procession route. They hadn't been there earlier. I would have noticed. Then the bell rang. Once. Deep. Muffled. Like it had soil in it. The woods went still, in that horrible, attentive way animals do when something enters their space. I stopped walking. The bell rang again. 2 notes, slightly out of time. And suddenly, I remembered something my Nan used to say when the days started drawing in. Never count bells after the turn, she'd mutter. They're not meant for us. I checked my phone. 4:23 p.m. No signal. The light between the trees thinned, as if dusk had sped up just for me. The lanterns ahead burned brighter. Behind me, the path stretched longer than it should have, dark and unfamiliar. Then came the 3rd bell, close enough that I felt it in my teeth. Footsteps followed. Slow. Bare. Careful on frozen chalk. Someone was humming. Not a carol. Something older. A working tune. I stepped off the path and crouched behind a fallen beech, heart hammering so hard I thought it would give me away. The figure walked into view. It was man-shaped, wrapped in layered skins and old coats stitched beyond recognition. Ivy, holly, and mistletoe hung from it, tied with twine. Antlers were wired to its head, crooked, ribboned with dark red cloth. The mask was wood, carved. A smile too wide, teeth marked as if someone had counted them. In its hand was a bell that looked dug up rather than made. It stopped exactly where I'd been standing. Late, it said, pleasantly. Its voice was wrong in the worst way. Local. Familiar. Like someone I'd spoken to 100 times. We keep the old calendar here, it said. Someone must walk the path. Someone must be seen. I pressed my face into my sleeve to stop myself breathing. No matter, it continued. There's always one who forgets. It rang the bell once more. The lanterns dimmed. Then it stepped off the path and disappeared between the trees, humming as it went. Eventually, the woods returned to normal. Wind. A fox barking far away. I ran. On Christmas morning, the church bells rang late. Just once. They said it was a mechanical fault. They said old Graham Ellis hadn't come home from his walk. They said the woodland path hadn't been used. But that night, I heard humming outside my house, slow, patient. And somewhere nearby, a bell rang, not to mark the hour, but to make sure the year kept moving. When I was little, my parents would sometimes take me to visit my grandmother. I would complain there and back, as her house was deep in the sticks, with no television or much of anything to do. My grandmother herself would spend most of our visits sleeping. And my parents informed me that she wasn't all right in the head nowadays. I tried to spend most of our visits exploring the woods surrounding the house, and I was allowed to, as long as I agreed to not wander further than where I could see the house. One day, my parents had to run some errands in town, so left me at my grandmother's house, despite my protests. I was given my grandmother's permission to wander the woods, as I usually did, and I took to gathering pieces of wood. What I was planning to do with them, I can't tell you. It was easily the least impactful part of what ended up occurring that day. I ran out of pieces of wood to collect within the area I'd been permitted. I looked behind me and could see the house disappearing over the horizon. I figured going a bit further couldn't hurt. I found my way to a large oak, easily the largest on the property. It was surrounded by sticks that would have been perfect for what I needed, so I began to collect, the sticks starting to fall out of my arms. When I got up from retrieving one of the fallen sticks, I noticed a deep carving in the tree, one that looked to have been there for decades. In neat and precise handwriting, it read, "Olive and Ivy." Ivy was my grandmother's name, and Olive, whilst I didn't know anyone of that name, was familiar to me, as my grandmother would often mutter what I thought to be nonsense words to herself. And Olive would be one of the words that usually came up. I reached out to touch the carving, and I could feel how old it was. I felt a light tug on my hair and spun around, only to find no one behind me. Despite my curiosity, I was still an easily frightened child, so I began to run back to the house, yelling for my grandmother. But something tripped me, sending me face-planting into the fallen leaves on the ground. I screamed and scrambled to get up and look around. But again, there was nothing. I started to cry, even though I wasn't physically hurt. But I quickly stopped when I was yanked up to my feet by my arm. But it was still by nothing. I looked at the ground in front of me. Small dents in the leaves began to appear, looking as if they were left by human feet, heading towards the oak tree I had just run from. When I stood watching frozen, they stopped and only continued towards the tree when I gave a cautious step forward. Even though I couldn't stop crying, I followed the ghost footsteps, as any time I'd stop, they would also stop, and I felt the presence of something watching me until I kept walking. I just silently wiped my tears and followed obediently. When the footsteps finally stopped on their own, I was in front of the oak tree again. Before I had the chance to think about what was happening, the leaves at the base of the tree started being tossed aside until the bare ground could be seen. Immediately, I was pushed by this invisible force to the ground again, though this time I was able to catch myself with my hands before my face hit the ground. I felt someone watching me again, and it would intensify any time I looked away from the ground for even a second. I tried to push some of the dirt aside to see what would happen, and was surprised to find that the intense feeling that I'd been feeling had temporarily stopped. I tried to appear calm as I kept digging, but inside I was racing to try and figure out an escape. If I ran, it would just grab me again. If I yelled for my grandmother, would she hear me? I was running through my options until I felt metal. I pulled out a small metal box, so rusted that pieces of the paint chipped off as I held it. It was cold to the touch, and as I held it, I heard a noise coming from deep in the woods. At first, I thought it was a fox, but as I listened more, it started to sound more and more like another child crying. I tried to get up, to call out, and ask if they were okay. But I was yanked down again, my hands containing the box slamming into the ground, the force of the fall opening the lid of the box with a loud clang. Looking back at me was a little girl, trapped in a photograph that lay worn and ripped at the top of the contents of the box. I initially thought it was a picture of me, since the hair and eyes were almost identical. But the writing I found on the back of the photo identified her as Olive, 1945. She was smiling with her eyes in the photo, but not with her mouth. I'd always been able to tell the difference between when people are only smiling with their mouths and when they were really smiling with their eyes. Under the photo were some squares of thick paper with these watercolor paintings on them, of flowers, trees, and birds. They were all signed in pencil on the back with the same name, Olive. I also found a crumpled up piece of paper, and as I picked it up, the distant crying sound started again from the forest. I opened up the ball of paper to find a kid's drawing of a girl with pointy teeth, fingers and hair, cackling on top of a hill, a bright fire scribbled behind her. I found other similar drawings, all crumpled up in a similar way. Others had a woman scaring some children off a hill, or a girl drawn screaming into the night sky. The crying from the forest only grew louder, and it sounded like it was almost next to me. I crumpled the drawings back up and threw them on the ground beside the box, crushing them even further with the palm of my hand. The crying stopped instantly. I explored the box further. There was an old letter written on a typewriter, and with my limited reading ability, I was able to make it out. Dear Mrs. Ainsworth, following Olive's visit to Dr. Harper's practice, it has been determined that the girl appears to be of an unsound mind. Despite her obvious failings in language ability, nervousness and hyperactivity were observed, and Dr. Harper has diagnosed her with lunacy. The crying returned, but this time it was a heavy sobbing. I then noticed the cuddly toy stuffed into the corner of the box. It was a gray rabbit, the fur matted and stuck down, likely from a lifetime of hugs. It seemed normal at first, but when I looked closer, I could have sworn I saw blood on one of the ears. I reached to grab the rabbit, but was stopped by a shrill scream echoing through the woods. It made me jump and dumbly look around, even though I knew at this point that I wouldn't see anyone. At the bottom of the box was another photograph. This time, it was of two girls. One was happily smiling with her mouth, but her eyes stayed completely still. Her hair was done all pretty, and she was sat perfectly on the arm of a chair, looking at the camera. It wasn't Olive. Olive was the one in the chair. She was now in a nightgown instead of her school uniform, and her hair was knotted and all over, as if no one had brushed it in days. She still had no smile on her face, but the smile had gone from her eyes. There was nothing behind them now. I looked a bit closer into her eyes, trying to find life behind them. What I found instead was a line of stitches above one of her eyes. Even through the sepia, I could see the blood on the stitches. The sobbing had stopped, and I again felt the sensation of being watched again, this time more intense than ever.